anything else.
We don't want to know!
We're dedicated, yes.
To our favorite shows!
Oh, my circuits!
Everybody loves Hypnotoad!
Scary dog!
Blurson at Blurnsville!
Futurama!
Good evening. You are listening to a Radulich and Broadcasting Premier Podcast TV party tonight. I'm your host, the mandated reporter, and frankly, I'm mortified, Mr. Mark Radulich. And tonight, that is the Canadian contingent, Andrew Graham. Hello, sir.
Good evening, Mark.
And David Wright. Hello to you, sir.
Good evening.
We are continuing our look at the Netflix exclusive drama, The Crown, Season 4, which follows the life and reign of Queen Elizabeth II. This season was released on November 15th, 2020. It covers the time period between 1977 and 1990. It is set during Margaret Thatcher's premiership. It introduces the late Lady Diana Spencer and Prince William. Events depicted include the wedding of Prince Charles and Lady Diana Spencer, their 83 tour of Australia and New Zealand, the Falklands War, Michael Fagan's break-in at Buckingham Palace, Lord Mountbatten's funeral, the Princess of Wales' appearance at the Barnardo's Champions Children's Awards, and Thatcher's departure from office. Let me tell you all how, and as Andrew knows, because we've talked about this for the past 3 seasons, I don't know, whatever's in the show is what I know, but I was at least aware of Margaret Thatcher growing up, and I was aware of Princess Diana, and I have to say, this has been, because of their introductions as characters, this has been my favorite season to date of this series. Let's get an overview from you guys first. How did you like this season compared in very, very general terms to the previous 3 seasons, Andrew?
You know what? I probably kind of agree. I'd agree with you that this has been the strongest season. I don't know if I'd say it's solely because of some of the storylines that they chose, but I mean, I think it's definitely benefiting, I think this is among the most dramatic storylines you've had in a couple of cases, and you've had a little bit more antagonism than I think in a lot of the other seasons, and I think you felt like the stakes are higher. And on the flip side of that, I think you have the returning cast from season 4 being really, really comfortable in their roles at this point. You have Gillian Anderson coming in and just putting on a fairly awesome performance as Thatcher.
Oh,
and
she needs an Emmy.
Yeah.
Just give her the Emmy now.
And Emma Coren coming in and just having this, I'm just going to say, eerily haunting portrayal of Diana, which I think is a credit to both her and then also to the makeup and hair on this cast to play Diana, who I think has had I think what we can call a pretty tumultuous life and kind of a pretty tumultuous role in the public area. But overall, great season. I'm excited that they did announce that we are getting a full seasons 5 and 6 on this.
Yeah, they almost chickened out and weren't going to do the last season, but for whatever the reasons were, pressure from the fans, pressure from Netflix, pressure from Gravity, whatever, who knows. They went with the full 6, and we're getting an all-new cast for seasons 5 and 6. It is time to change faces. We'll talk about that at the end of the show. David, compared to the first 3 seasons, what did you think of this one in very general terms, and then we'll get specific.
So generally, I thought there was less going on in this season than in the previous seasons. Like you said, I watched this show partially just because it fills in a lot of this history that I haven't known about. Of course, with the huge caveat that this is a historical drama, emphasis on drama. So you don't know what's been sort of changed or filled in for the purposes of, keeping it nice and dramatic. But I'll touch a bit more on that probably later. But yeah, this season it's mostly been Margaret Thatcher and Charles and Diana. And Charles and Diana has taken up a vast amount of time in the show. Which, I mean, it is a very important event. Even like growing up, paying not much attention to the news, I knew that there was something about Charles and Diana going on. But it kind of felt like, did you really have to spend half the season showing how much of a twit Charles was to Diana? like, okay, I get it.
I think that's grist for the mill. We can talk about that because my answer is yes. I at this point I want a Charles and Diana spinoff. I want a Margaret Thatcher spinoff. Can we get like a Netflix British exclusive Netflix Plus, exclusives like spin-offs from this series where it's just Charles and Diana and just a Margaret Thatcher 6 episodes. Sorry, I've got Disney on the brain. Never mind.
Yeah, you want the Crown Cinematic Universe?
Yes.
AKA all of human history?
I've got it. Here's your team up. It's actually, I should say, is there anyone not watching the current season of The Mandalorian?
I am not. Well, I will watch it when it finishes and we're ready to review it.
All right, fine. Then I'll
This
put
is
it
the
this
way.
way. I've got the idea. It is Thatcher and Baby Yoda go to Whitehall.
Perfect. All right. I want to address this right at the top of the podcast, and then we can get into the drama. But there is an entire section of this Wikipedia page that talks about historical inaccuracies, and specifically the British historian that, if I can find his name, I'll let people know who he is. But there is there is a British historian that's like, you've turned this into a soap opera. You've made it where certain people were dead when certain things when one thing happened, and and they weren't even there when another thing happened, and your presentation of some of these people makes them worse than they actually were, and that this is becoming more of as I said, a soap opera than it is a historical fiction. And my standpoint of view, and you guys can weigh in on this if you want, but my standpoint of view is I have to judge this as a drama. It's not a documentary. It's not presented necessarily as a beat for beat, spot for spot, moment for moment, bullet point presentation of these people's lives. This is a 6-part story, and my thing is to judge it on performance, judge it on craft, judge it on entertainment level. And that may be because I don't know enough about this particular subject matter to judge it against its real history. But I think it's a little unfair to say the show lacks in quality because it's not a proper representation of historical fact. That's where I'm coming from. What do you think, Andrew?
I'm willing to be fairly lenient. I mean, I know for a fact there are definitely elements of the show that have been exaggerated or changed or invented. I'm rewatching episode 1 right now, and for example, the letter that Mountbatten writes to Charles never actually existed. Peter Morgan out and out said that was a narrative choice that he made. I think what the letter says kind of got across. I think I've heard a lot of different opinions on this. I've heard secondhand from my wife, who was reading some of these articles, that apparently people who knew Diana and supported Diana thought that the series was very true, was the best depiction of her they've ever seen in fiction. Obviously, there's a lot of people on the royal side who are criticizing the series because of the portrayal of Charles. And I mean, you have to think everyone has agendas here. And one of the things you got to keep an eye on here is that Charles, for the time being, as far as we know, is going to be the next monarch. So there's a question of kind of managing the brand in terms of how people think about and perceive Charles. Same thing can be said for Thatcher. I mean, we'll get into this, I'm not really familiar with the political biography of Margaret Thatcher, but it's been really pointed that everyone who's making defenses of her and criticisms of the portrayal were very much on kind of the conservative side of things. I will say, apparently, the one thing that has a particular group of people very, very angry is the portrayal of Prince Charles' fly fishing technique in episode 1.
Perfect.
I'm not a fly fisherman. I have no comment.
I'll have to ask my wife's best friend who has gone fly fishing to critique his technique.
Well, they were using like way longer fly rods too, so I don't know if it's just something you do differently, but yeah, I don't know. We'll leave the fly fishermen to themselves.
All right, we'll talk about it next in our next fishing review show. We don't do a fishing review show. Anyway, the person I was referencing earlier was royal biographer Sally Bedell Smith, who criticized the inaccuracies and negative portrayal of the royal family, stating, because The Crown is such a lavish and expensive production, so beautifully acted and cleverly written, and so much attention has been paid to visual details about the historical events, viewers are tricked into believing that what they are seeing actually happened, concluding that while the earlier seasons were period pieces, this is recent history, so it seems more cruel in its false depictions. David, what say you?
Well, back to your original point, yeah, I would say that it is definitely a quality production, just in terms of the acting, the attention to detail, the general production level. You know, whether or not it's historically accurate doesn't really have a bearing on the quality in that sense. But as I said before, it's a historical drama, emphasis on the drama part. So it would be nice if people went in understanding that this is a dramatization and it is not going to be 100% historically accurate to the situations. And on top of that, you're dealing with, I think this covers about 11 years of history, you know, condensed into like 6 or 8 episodes. So of course, you know, you're going to have to kind of strip things down to the bare bones in terms of what you're going to show. Like, you have to understand that this has been years of time compressed to just the highlights that work with the narrative that they're going with. So, like, for example, it might seem like Charles has been nothing but completely horrible to Diana, but I would assume in that period of time, there were also some, like, good moments, too. Like, this probably didn't, you know, things probably deteriorated over time. And the other problem is, of course, lack of knowledge. Like, you cannot be in the room knowing exactly everything that happened at the time. You can try and cobble things together through, you know, investigations, interviews with, you know, staffers or people who were sort of next to these events, but you know, you'll never exactly have a perfect view of what happened. And then, you know, add on top of that is having to hammer all this stuff into a narrative for a season of a TV show. So I almost think that it might be best if, much like they had the eating disorder warning, just say, you know, although based on historical events, this is a dramatization and might not be accurate as to what really happened. You know, take that with a grain of salt.
I completely agree. All right, let's break this down by characters. I can't wait to talk about Gillian Anderson, but I want to give the Queen her due. So Olivia Coleman makes her second season return as Queen Elizabeth II. And I was talking to Andrew the last time we did this about how seemingly older than the character actually is Olivia Coleman looks. And this season, I was more comfortable with her as a performer, as a character. I think because at this point I'm over the hump of, oof, she looks like grandma. I was more settled into her, and I actually really enjoyed Olivia Coleman this season. She has, unfortunately, fortunately, depending on how you look at it, because so much of the season focuses on Charles, Diana, and then secondary to that, Thatcher, this season doesn't give as much to Coleman, and poor Timaeus Menzies has been reduced to like a side character, and we'll talk about him soon. But I will say, because the cast is a little bit more crowded now in season 4 than it had been in previous seasons, Coleman has some very great moments. Like, she isn't even though she's the centerpiece character, I don't feel like she was the centerpiece of season 4, but she does have some great moments, especially in the latter part of the season, Andrew, you know, where I think Diana goes to hug her after they have one of their meetings, and Coleman, God, great acting is in the subtlety, and you could feel Olivia Coleman's discomfort through the screen. Like, I don't mind people hugging me, and her portrayal of utter agony being hugged by this weirdo, Diana, was so good. It was a great moment for her. She has two other great moments that stand out to me, and I want you to speak to your enjoyment or whatever you have to say about Coleman in a moment. But her other reaction to when she has a conversation with Anne, and I love Anne's monologue about Charles and Diana. She has a great line in there about, after the child is born, he feels the job is done, and he moves in, and she talks about him moving on. Coleman in that scene does a lot of acting with her face, and she is phenomenal in showing anxiety and frustration, and she doesn't say a word. She just lets Anne talk. It's great. The other one is when she finally goes off on Charles in the season finale.
Yes.
Oh my God.
We'll get to that.
I wanted to stand up and cheer, and I was, in my living room. She delivers it with such force and such attitude without necessarily ranting or screaming. Coleman gave a very measured performance, but you feel nothing but anger in that monologue. It's phenomenal. Give me your thoughts on Queen Elizabeth, all the things Queen Elizabeth and Olivia Coleman this season, Andrew.
I mean, yeah, I think you're really on track there with the fact that, her as the character was a little bit relegated to the side, but oh my God, you're right. Her performance was just spot on the entire season. It was so subtle and so measured in the right places at the right time when it came to, like I said, the awkwardness with Charles and Diana. The conversation with Anne was fantastic. The dressing down of Charles at the end of the season was pretty incredible. I was I'm watching season 1 here, and I mean, I even watched her reaction when she was told that Mountbatten was killed, and she is doing so much. She's expressing so much with such minimal movement in her face. It's just amazing on how expressive she was and how much she carried the season. And I mean, I think her performance is great. I think what I was interested in particular this season was what it was saying about the character and where she went. I think I might be jumping ahead here, but I'm gonna give you my holy shit, I don't believe they said that moment of the season. And it was actually in episode 4, Favorites, where they said that Prince Andrew is her favorite, which I think was, to me, kind of shocked me given his current position right now.
I want to take just a half a second, and then I'll throw it to you, Dave. One of the things that I like about this show, and that I kept thinking about, and it just kept resonating with me, and I couldn't, it bit into me, and I couldn't let go of it, was how, and they show kind of a montage to this effect at the end of the season, was how much the idea of the monarchy weighs on individuality and individuals. And, we see a lot of that in Charles, but the point of the show and what they show you in it is how, I think at one point one of the characters, I don't remember who, talks about, like, the monarchy just breaks you. It breaks you as an individual. It breaks you as a personality. And, and everyone just ends up being bridled with this thing they can't get rid of. It's both a blessing and a curse to be part of this family, to be part of the monarchy.
I think it was Margaret.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She's saying Diana will bend to the family, and well, what if she doesn't? Well, then she will break.
Yeah. But, I mean, if you look at, like, every single character suffers from the same ailment, and that is they cannot be themselves. They cannot be fully developed people because there's this expectation that you be a very limited thing in this very public entity. I mean, it's... And you see how Queen Elizabeth has adapted to it, but in doing so, she sacrificed like a part of her soul. and you look at Philip, and he's learned his place, and he has that final conversation with Diana at the end of the season about
also long overdue.
About I would not buck too hard if I were you. And she's like, is that his threat? He was like, you're gonna get crushed is what's gonna happen. I don't have to threaten you. It's just what's going to happen. And it's just weird. Like the crown itself is its own character. Like in the way that the city of everyone hit center square on your bingo card. Like the city of Baltimore is a character in The Wire.
Take a drink.
Take a drink. It is this thing that it bears on every character and every plot line, and it is inescapable. Go ahead, David.
I can't really add too much as far as Olivia Coleman regarding what you and Andrew have said. Again, terrific performance. She hits all the notes she has to in the part she does, so I'll probably talk a bit more about the character of Queen Elizabeth. Again, the character, not the actual historic person.
Go ahead. The floor is yours.
Sure. Yeah. So, certainly in this season, she has the least stories that are directly about her. It's like the one where she's trying to get Margaret Thatcher to boycott South Africa over apartheid. You get her trying to figure out which of her children is her favorite, just as a exercise. And you have the castle invasion isn't the right term, but the break into the castle episode.
The trespass?
Trespass, thank you. That's a much better word than what I was searching for. Yeah, those are kind of like the episodes that focus mostly on her as a character. Like the storyline is driven more by her, whereas other than that, it's more Elizabeth and how she's dealing with her family. Where it's her trying. She's stopped becoming. Well, she's stopped being the young Queen Elizabeth who's just trying to figure out this job, and now she's settled into being the matriarch of the family, where she's just trying to keep everything together and keep things going. And I'm going to talk about this more later on, but the show is not called The Queen, it's not called The Royal Family, it's not called Elizabeth or the House of Windsor or anything like that. It's called The Crown. And I think that is the central theme of it, as you have mentioned, about just how much this idea of the crown, not just the physical, fancy hat that the crown is, but just the idea of the responsibility of this role in society and just how it crushes these most basic of human interactions. Like Margaret mentions, when will this family ever learn that keeping people from marrying who they love is never going to end well? And one aspect of Elizabeth that separates her from the rest of the family, not just she's the queen, is she actually did get to marry her sweetheart. Her and Philip, that was the relationship she wanted, and that's the relationship she got. And in the earlier seasons, we got to see even the effects that had on the relationship, with Philip basically being emasculated in his opinion and turning to, other women and infidelity to deal with that. And the two of them were eventually able to overcome that and now seem to have a positive working relationship that the other characters have not really managed to duplicate. But you see her trying to base her advice on that, telling Charles and Diana, look, you've got to make this work. That's your job. That's the job of this family. Put on a good show, sort your problems out, and get on with it. So in that respect, I think the character has evolve quite decently.
She has a great line in this, and I think about the worst amongst us. Drug addicts have a purpose in life; they get up and they seek out drugs. But she has this great line: "We will do what we will do best. We will do nothing." And how these are smart, educated people who can contribute to society, but they're not allowed. I get how Margaret and Charles bristle, and Philip at one point just bristle against the bridle of the crown in the frustration of but I have thoughts and ideas and nobody gives a shit. Wow, what a horrible existence. Like I said,
kinda funny, Mark,
even drug addicts have a purpose in life. Go ahead.
I was going to say that it reminds me of just actually one of the first lines out of and I can't even remember what the name of the movie is now. But Peter Morgan, who wrote this series, also wrote he wrote The Queen, actually, which was the other movie about involving Diana and the Queen, and Helen Mirren played the Queen in that movie. And one of her comments was after Tony
Blair.
Yeah, Tony Blair got elected. Was I think she was musing about how what an experience it must be like to vote.
I think it was Philip was talking about that. It's like, I've never voted before. It would be nice to try it for once.
Yeah, it was one of them who was doing that, and that's a really good way of doing it. And I think to both of your points, I mean, I think I brought this up when talking about first season and kind of the relationship of the Crown to things in the UK and Commonwealth, and still heavily Commonwealth countries like Canada. The Crown is not only the Crown is literally the state. If you're brought up on charges, it's you versus the Crown. We have Crown prosecutors. You guys have the Bureau of Land Management for public lands. Our public lands are called Crown lands. Like, it's pretty intrinsic.
All right. I'm going to let you guys tell me who we should talk about next. Because I desperately want to talk about Gillian Anderson's Margaret Thatcher. But in the cast list, the next up is Philip, and the next up is Margaret. Or we can skip them and go right to Margaret Thatcher. What do you think, Dave?
Well, I think since we did have an episode of Margaret Thatcher fighting it out with Elizabeth, we can draw a line between Elizabeth and Thatcher. So, happy Hanukkah, Mark.
Give Gillian Anderson all the Emmys. She is phenomenal in this. She is the best part of this entire season. I watch so much crap acting. I watch so much television where people are just kind of doing riffs on themselves, or they're just, reading lines, and they're not really creating a character, giving a performance. They're just acting emotionally appropriately to whatever situation they're in, that the script tells them that they're in. But here's Gillian Anderson, who's, God, how old is she? She's 52.
She's 53.
Yeah, 52. But she is not this woman that she portrays. She crafted a whole character here. This is acting. Like, if somebody said, point to a performance to kind of give you an example of what real acting looks like, this is fucking it, man. Like, this made me excited about the show. The moment she showed up to sit with the Queen for the first time in the first of the weekly visits between the Prime Minister and the Queen, I was like, holy cow. And she, and she's so good. She keeps, sometimes they create these performances, or somebody will do like an accent or something, and we'll comment, as we've done here on TV Party. Sometimes people lose their accents, or the performance is not, as tight as it should be throughout all the episodes. She doesn't miss a goddamn beat. And one of my favorite things, and it's just hard to do. They're out there in the damn field, wherever they're. Andrew, help me out here. Where was
They're
their?
up in the Highlands.
Thank you.
Up near up in Balmoral.
Okay, so they're at their country home, and she's got to walk on hills, and because in that one particular scene, which apparently isn't true, but she was dressed in her pantsuit and everything, and she's wearing heels, and and she has this great exchange with Coleman, and and the antagonism starts right there. But she's able to keep up this throaty, dramatic performance while she's falling all over herself. It's so good, And then she, later on in the season, you brought up the South Africa thing. You don't get to see a lot of Thatcher being a badass the way that I remember her being portrayed in the news opposite Reagan. You know, it was Reagan and the Iron Lady. They were Bret the Hitman and Jim the Anvil Neidhart of 80s, you know, world leaders. And, you know, good old Axe and Smash. How many more wrestling references can I make? But
take 4 more drinks.
But you know, they were portrayed sometimes negatively, sometimes positively, but definitely all the time as, you know, these hard as nails, strong leaders. And there are parts of the Crown this season where you get that sense from her, but I don't know if they really give her a chance to be like, this is what this person did, and you know, and that's what made her such a badass. Until you get to whether you know you're with her or against her, and I would say 100, almost 90% of the people who saw that would be against her. But you know, when she's sitting there like, no, I'm not going to stand by sanctions on South Africa, and it's just like that whole like. She seemed almost like she was getting younger in that scene and like getting like muscly and stronger. Like she's so good in the exchanges where she keeps sending back the letter, and it comes down
that
to
was
one.
Fantastic.
Oh, it's so like I'm just gushing, but yeah, Gillian Anderson as Margaret Thatcher did a tremendous job, right down to the very end where. You know, where Queen Elizabeth pins the medal on her for being an awesome woman, and she's like, you could just see her wanting to jump out of her skin. Like I said, Andrew, acting is in the subtleties.
It is. I'm not going to lie. I'm not going to deny, it's a great performance. I think I had issues in terms of some of the mannerisms she took on, and I mean, I think once you get to the end of the season, it really blooms. But like her ability to hold this character the entire time, I think the thing that distracted me while I was watching it was that she was, and again, this is somebody who has not watched a lot of what the actual Margaret Thatcher was like. I think she almost plays a little too stiff. And I think sometimes and again, you know, I don't have a lot of reference on what Margaret Thatcher sounded like and everything like that. And maybe it goes to hairstyling and clothes at the time, but like at the beginning of the season, Margaret Thatcher and Gillian Anderson are basically the same age. And there's just this, she holds everything all too tight. Her face is maybe a little too tight. And it kind of distracted me a little bit. And once it got later in the season and she became more expressive and more forward, I think I really liked that performance more. That said, I mean, holy crap, her scenes with basically anybody else, I mean, particularly with Olivia Coleman, were just electric. Like, she knew those two had fantastic chemistry. They played off each other magnificently. You know, I mean, I think... I would tell
you, and I don't think I'm overselling this by saying those two had a better fight scene than Anakin and Ben Kenobi in Revenge of the Sith.
I especially
they certainly had a lot less pointless spinny shit.
yeah, without even hitting it, without ever hitting anything.
Yeah,
I mean,
you officially hit the point of trying too hard.
Yeah. What I think the other thing to talk about, I mean, obviously, is Thatcher herself, and talk about kind of that character of Thatcher aside from the performance. And I think it is interesting. I think on some level they were maybe being, I don't know if they were including the entire story, and we get into the question of omission. I mean, like the big storylines for Thatcher were the Falkland Islands War, kind of a lot of the drama within her own cabinet, and the South Africa story. But the thing that they don't cover in this show is that kind of in the later half of her
prime ministership.
I was going to say government is probably the most correct way to say it. The latter half of her government, the UK actually had a pretty massive building boom that benefited a lot of people, maybe a little too much in the construction trades and things like that. So I mean, was the UK as dire as it was through the you know the duration of her her government? Probably not. I mean, we can start to get into arguments about.
Do you mean to tell me that
Thatcherism was a thing?
Do you mean to tell me the producers of this show may have had a liberal agenda?
Possibly. I mean, today she is not well liked at all. I don't think her legacy in the long term has been particularly good.
Apparently, after she died, the song "Ding Dong, the Witch is Dead" was chopping the charts in the UK. Hello?
Like, I mean, she did a lot of spending cuts and things like that I think they haven't quite recovered from in terms of healthcare and some of their social systems and things like that. But I think, again, if we want to talk about this as a, it's not a documentary, but I think there's something to be said for saying that at this time she was liked versus 20 years later where she's hated.
Mm-hmm. But that's what I mean. Like, I joked about it, but without knowing the history, and I would tell you that there's probably a more left bent for this show that would go out of its way to say, look, like if they were doing, America in the 80s, they would go out of their way to show how Reagan's cuts did not benefit America. And yeah, like they would focus on the negative and like, oh, look, there was a recession as soon as he was out of office and that sort of thing. So I think the same prism is being applied to England, and I say that with complete ignorance of what was really happening, but the sense that I'm getting is there was, I think for dramatic purposes, they wanted to present Thatcher as somewhat sympathetic at times, because this isn't a fantasy. People are complicated, but I think that there was also an agenda afoot to say, in retrospect, what she did to this country was not great, and people suffered. What do you think, Dave?
Well, like Andrew, I don't really have a lot of knowledge already of Margaret Thatcher and her legacy. I can say, to put it as diplomatically as possible, she is a controversial figure. Again, as Andrew sort of alluded to, chances are if you're a conservative, you have a positive view of Thatcher. If you're a liberal, then you have a very negative view of Thatcher. Like I said, when she died, apparently on the radio, "Ding Dong, the Witch is Dead" was a popular song that they were playing in celebration. I remember seeing one thread on Facebook or something, someone asking, why have they not built any monuments to Margaret Thatcher's government? And someone replied they did. They're called food banks.
Ooh.
Yeah. So yeah, like you say, there's a lot of people that really, really hated her, but at the same time, like she was in office for 11 years, so apparently enough people thought she was better than any of the alternatives. As to the details, I cannot say one way or the other, but I will give them credit again. Like you say, a lot of the entertainment industry tends to be very left-leaning and quite eager to put that into everything, and that Margaret Thatcher's depiction came as her being a person in this and not 100% negative. I think they showed some good restraint there. And again, as I said before, the title of the show is The Crown. It's not, The Iron Woman. That's a different movie. So, what we see of Margaret Thatcher is more in relation to her and the Crown, as opposed to her as the Prime Minister and her effects thereof. And I did actually watch a little bit of a video of her giving a speech in Parliament, the actual Margaret Thatcher, and I'd say Gillian Anderson got her pretty close. And in fact, sort of a testament to her skill is when I saw Gillian Anderson in the opening credits, I had to actually go on IMDb to figure out which character she was playing.
My last little bit on this, and just because it amused me, but the measured tones in which Coleman, especially towards the end of the season, where Coleman has just about had the fucking enough with Thatcher, and she makes the mistake of letting her opinion known that she's not particularly thrilled with her and her performance. And of course, this leads to a scandal and all that, and that's a whole episode. But those two get into the most polite knockdown dragout you've ever seen. And it's so funny, like, like my wife and I are not screamers. And I mean, we've had our moments, but we've often, because screaming and yelling and name calling doesn't get you anywhere. And so my wife and I have had like pretty serious arguments, just like that though, where it's like, I hear what you're saying, but here's my point. It just kind of goes on like that.
Yeah, the verbal kung fu.
Yeah,
the polite verbal kung fu that is on display.
So good God, and those scenes of looks could kill.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm saying, like, go ahead, Dave.
Yeah, well, I have to say, like, my absolute favorite Thatcher moment of the entire season was when Elizabeth says, "Oh, don't you think that'll make you a lot of enemies?" It's like, only if one is unaccustomed to having enemies. Oh, and you are? Oh, yes. having enemies is a sign that you are doing things in life. And then she, like, reads this whole poem about, like how sad it is for the person that has gone through life with no enemies. They have never crossed anyone or done anything of merit.
The portrayal of the two of them in those scenes, I think, and it's all in the subtleties, it's all in the subtext, but there are, at least as I was picking up, and maybe Andrew, you saw this, maybe you didn't, but I think they went out of their way to show Thatcher as sort of what Coleman would have liked to be in a parallel universe. Here Thatcher has this power to enact her philosophy. There's a bit where she's talking about, the medicine might not taste well, but you have to, you have to take your medicine. And she's talking about the economy and the cuts and everything. And she, in order to create growth, you have to create the same. It was the same thing in the United States with Reagan. That's why we had the boom that we did. The idea was, if you create an atmosphere for investment, growth will come of that, and from that, jobs will trickle down, and people will have money, and they will spend, and the economy will grow. That's what she's talking about with the medicine, and you see, and they pan to Olivia Coleman, and she's almost shaking. She's just like vibrating in her chair, because like in that moment, I think there's a tacit recognition that this woman is able to do things, right or wrong. She's able to carry out her will, and they're, the most powerful woman in England, utterly powerless to do anything. Even if she gives an opinion, she's wrong. And that's not what the people want from her, and how frustrating that has to be as a person.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think there's definitely I think that's an element of the rivalry, and I think it's interesting. And again, this is me not commenting on, me not knowing a lot about Thatcher and what her views were, but I mean, they kind of portray her as a little bit of a Republican. Small R, that is, in terms of like the crown is there, but they elected me and I'm in charge. And I'm the one who's going to do things, and I'm the one who should, on some level, get a little bit of the glory. I mean, at the end of, I can't recall which episode, where after the Falkland Islands War, she takes the salute. That's something that the regent does, that the king or queen does. So they kind of put a little bit of that forward. I mean, I think they do very much portray Elizabeth and Thatcher as being kind of almost equal counterpoints to each other, given the fact they're even the same age, give or take. But they did, of course, give that line that Gillian Anderson had so much fun saying, of it's like, I'm the senior by 6 months. It's not very often you get to big dog a monarch.
All right.
Quick also side note, I got to get this one in now. My only key disappointment in this season that we did not get to see their version of Reagan.
Yeah. Well, given what we've just talked about, I'm kind of glad, because it would have been like, and we got the guy who played Urkel to play, I don't know. Just,
Mark, you're telling me there's somebody from The Wire who could have played Reagan?
I can name 5 people from The Wire that could have played Reagan. I'm not saying they all would have been white. I'm just saying.
All that is Reagan.
All right. just to get them out of the way and talk a little bit about what they did this season. I mean, Philip, not much, but let's talk about Philip and Prince Margaret. Philip, like I said, doesn't have Tobias Menzies does a tremendous job as the character. He just doesn't have a whole lot to do this season. He's kind of in and out, and he's kind of the Greek chorus at times. He just sort of walks in and goes, "Well, here's the situation," and kind of walks out of the room again.
I'm still here.
Yeah.
Go exposition.
Helena Bonham Carter is a triumph as Princess Margaret. I talked about this with you last season, Andrew, about how when she's not Tim Burtoned up, she's actually really attractive. In this season, after everything that happened with her last season, she's, as she talks about, she's just sort of broken in, and she has this one moment of like, hey, pursuing. She has that old single woman's thing of, well, I can't find a boyfriend. Men aren't worth shit. So I'll tell you what. Let me change my focus. And it is this exact moment that they were like, well, there's no room for you anymore. Like this poor woman. Jesus Christ. But Helena Bonham Carter does a great job as Princess Margaret. The little bit they gave her to do was fascinating. Apparently, the stuff with what are they? The Bow sisters, the Bowen. What's the names?
I want to say Bowles.
Bowles, yeah, the two Bowles ladies that are in the mental institution. Apparently, that is not none. That was all. A lot of that was fictionalized, but it gave. You have Helena Bonham Carter, you should use her. So they gave her that, and they gave her the B story of being listless and trying to figure out what her purpose is. In this season, so I'll miss her when she's gone, which she will be next season. David, I'll start with you. Good old Phil and Princess Margaret. Your thoughts?
I kind of got most of my thoughts regarding Philip down. He's there. He shows up to deliver some exposition or make some sort of point to get the ball rolling on a couple of things, but he doesn't really have anything solid to do story-wise overall until you get his sort of interaction with Diana at the very end of the season, where he sort of shoehorns in the speech about the crown being the most important thing, despite the show not really being about Elizabeth that much. Like it almost made me flash back to the end of Star Trek Discovery season 1, where they're like, "Oh wait, it's been 16 episodes. We need to have a point to all this, so let's just make something up and dub it over the end, so people feel like they haven't wasted the last 10 hours of their lives watching this." But that's another podcast. But yeah, overall the performance was good. But yeah, it's just there wasn't a whole lot for him to do this season, so I'll move on.
He has one great line to Charles when the first meeting that him and Elizabeth have with Charles and Diana says, "I want to make this work," and Charles says, "But I have things to say," and he says something to the effect of like, "What else is there to say? Your wife wants to make this work, fucko. get on the stick."
There's something along the lines of you're not allowed to have opinions in this family.
Yeah, and that even sort of ties back to last season where he did the speech in Welsh and Elizabeth berated him for expressing an opinion. He's like, "Oh, but I have so many things I want to say," and nobody cares.
Nobody
cares.
cares.
You have to say. Yeah,
I want that to be like the poster for season 6, The Crown. Nobody cares, and it's just a picture of all of them.
Yeah, but yeah, on to Margaret is again Helena Bonham Carter, fantastic actress, does a good job. Yeah, again it's late in life Margaret, the party girl princess, who's now getting into her later years, or at least middle age, and kind of dealing with the problem that it's hard to be the life of the party anymore, and she hasn't had enough luck finding someone to settle down with. So yeah, you have that aspect of her looking for purpose and not really being able to find it, and you have a bit of her commentary on the family itself. Again, she had that great line of, when will we learn to stop forcing people to marry people they don't love? It never ends well. So I'll take this time to kind of talk a bit more about the actual episode she's in, where it goes into how again, the crown and the sort of oppressive, horrible force that it can exert on a family when she goes to the Queen Mother and says, like, we disowned two of our own bloodline. Why is that? And the Queen Mother says, like, the bloodline had just switched over to our family, and if it had gotten out that we had a couple of people with developmental issues, let's say, that would have cast a whole lot of doubt on our right to rule, so we had to bury them. And it turns out in the end that it wasn't a genetic condition that would have passed down through the main line. But again, like, just that ability that you cannot even openly support your own family members if they have problems like that, because you have to maintain this image, for the stability of the nation. It's like the actor comedian Stephen Fry. He's a monarchist, and I think he summed it up the best I've ever heard. He says, like, when you look at the monarchy, it's really dumb, this idea, but for some reason it works. Like if you take the monarchy away from England, it starts to fall apart. Like they did that. There was a revolution. They executed the king at the time and established a republic, and it didn't work. And they ended up reinstating another king to get things going again. And he just says, like, there's something about having this person, this living flag, be sort of this part of the system. And I think that sort of ties into what the crown is in part, is this sort of idea of a living flag, and the family politics or image having to play into maintaining that flag's appearance. So that's kind of mostly what I got out of that Margaret episode.
Andrew, your thoughts on Philip and Margaret and the actors who play them?
Okay, let's go with Philip first. I'm actually going to say I really liked a lot of what. I mean, definitely he did not have a lot to do. I liked a lot of what Philip did do this season. I mean, Tobias Menzies was fantastic with him. I think a lot more comfortable in the character. I mean, I think we see probably my favorite version of the relationship between the Queen and Prince Philip, in terms of them kind of having settled in. They're partners. They're talking to each other in a pretty constructive way. I like Philip's scenes with Princess Anne. He had some really good scenes both during the Balmoral test and then in the last episode of the season with Diana. And apparently that's something that was relatively true, where Philip and Diana were actually relatively close within the family, because Philip kind of saw the writing on the wall a little bit on the fact that Diana was coming in as a bit of an outsider, and him being in that position, wanted to try and help her as much as he could. And they were apparently close at points. I think Dave covered off Princess Margaret pretty well. I mean, I think again, Helena Bonham Carter's performance was fantastic. Her portrayal of being kind of the settled discontent in the family in terms of how things had gone, both in her personal and her as it were professional life. I mean, and just interestingly enough, talking about the whole element of only having so many members who you can focus on the royal family, that's still a thing to this day. A few years back, apparently Prince Andrew tried to elevate himself and his two daughters in the profile, and at the time they said, no, you are not doing that. We are focusing on this many members of the royal family, and that's it.
He's certainly not elevating things now.
Oh no.
I don't know what that means.
Actually, this was a good enough point to make this point. Like this, the episode where the Queen's interviewing all her children, and they do Andrew, and he swoops in the helicopter, all cocksure of himself, and sits down to dinner and starts talking about, I need to find a good woman. There's this one woman in a basically a porno movie that I like, but it's art. And she's about 17. I'm like, oh boy, like, that sure set things up. Like, I don't know if that was in like the more current events were in people's minds when they did that scene, but yeah, it was like, oh boy, yeah, she was right to be concerned.
Yeah, no, like I said, I mean, I was blown away by that moment because it's like, given what Andrew's profile is right now, for them to write that episode, and I mean, I think some of his behavior has been kind of an open secret for a few years. For them to write that episode and put that out there, especially given some of what Andrew said within like the last 8 months, is pretty ballsy.
Okay, I'm utterly lost here.
So
he
Prince
was
Andrew
involved.
got implicated with Jeffrey Epstein.
Ew.
Yeah.
So he apparently, the FBI has literally been trying to talk to this guy for months now.
Well, good luck. He's part of the royal family.
Oh yeah, well, I mean, there's been discussions about actually trying to compel him to go talk about it. He gave a really tone-deaf interview about a few months back, trying to respond to one of the allegations. It just the royal palaces issued a statement on it. It was just awful all the way around.
Ew. All right, let's move on. If you don't mind.
No.
Go for it.
All right, so we're an hour into this podcast. This is what everyone's been waiting for. This is the main event. This is Prince Charles and Lady Di, portrayed by Josh O'Connor and Emma Coren. And this is a lot, what the parts that aren't about Margaret Thatcher, this is a lot of what season 4 revolves around. And correct me if I'm wrong, but the portrayal of Princess Diana, the woman was almost sainted, right? Like, even if she had, negative issues about her, if there were things that you could legitimately criticize, nobody did. And that she was this, without having died tragically the way that she did. Before all of that, I use the word sainted, and I don't think I'm overselling it. My impression of the world's reaction to this woman was that she walked on water. Am I wrong about that, Andrew?
I think I alluded to this earlier. Diana's got kind of a complicated legacy because I think the other thing that people start to, I think there's the glamorous elements of Diana that were kind of there the entire time that people latched onto. I think on the flip side of that, you also get into a lot of her, we'll call it kind of her post-royal philanthropic stuff. I mean, she was very much one of the big advocates of the ban on landmines. I think the one kind of big philanthropic thing that is portrayed in this season, which everybody remembers, that was when she was one of the first major public figures to physically touch a person who had been diagnosed with HIV. Like, that was in 1990, unprecedented in a lot of ways. Diana's complicated because I think on the one hand, I mean, this is going to be the grist of this conversation. On the one hand, she definitely was somebody who was out of her depth. Did she also handle that the best way on her own most of the time? I'd probably say not. And I think there's a question of how she gets portrayed in the series.
Well, let me first say, I think the actress Emma Coren, she relies a lot on biting her lip for her performances. Not that she didn't give a strong performance. I think she gave a perfectly adequate to good performance in the show. I was interested in what this character was doing. I think the character of Diana was one of reactions. She's reacting to the way Charles treats her. She's reacting to the weight of the crown. She's reacting to the way Queen Elizabeth treats her. And it's a lot of... They told the story of what the crown does to people in her and in her plot lines. And so, I'm dancing around it. I'll just say it out loud. She's driven kind of crazy and she develops an eating disorder in the show. I don't know if she did in real life. I don't know enough about the woman, so I can't say.
She most definitely did.
Okay.
Yep.
But that's the story being told here, is that here is this perfectly ordinary person who gets the chance of a lifetime. This is life lottery that she's won here in being proposed to by Charles. And, it's a Faustian bargain, which he finds out all too late. And along the way, she's driven mad, I tell you, quite mad. But I think here's my thing. And this is one of the faults, I think, of the show. I was thinking about this with Margaret, and I was thinking about this with Diana. Because they're rushing through a lot of things, at times what the show does in terms of presentation is, here's a thing that happens, and just accept that it happens, without giving sufficient explanation as to why it's happening. So, for example, with Margaret, when her government turns against her, and she ends up being ousted as prime minister, I didn't get a really strong sense as to what the fuck happened. How'd she lose everybody? People are, resigning, and it's just happening in the show. And maybe I missed a detail there, but, I didn't feel like the narrative was very strong around how we got to that place. We just did. With Diana...
Yeah, I didn't pick on anything there either.
Okay, good.
Feel any better. It's just history happened.
Yeah.
Let's get to the scene where the Queen gives her a medal.
This is the page we're on. And with Diana, when they have the confrontation with her and Charles, and I love Charles. I love him to death. I think he's such a twat, but he's such a fun character, because it's this poor bastard. I have things I have to... his whole thing is, I have things I have to say. Shut up. Nobody cares. Smack. I brought you to the couch to talk to you about your marriage and about the pain you're causing this family, and that you need to get your shit together. And do you want this marriage to succeed? And Diana cuts him off and says, yes, of course I do. I'll do anything to make it happen. And Charles is like, I have some shit to say.
Yeah. I prepared a speech.
And his father looks up and goes, who gives a shit? She already gave the answer, and it was the right one. You sit there and be Charles. Oh, but I didn't get a strong enough sense of what was going on in their marriage to why she would want it to continue when they were both so miserable. At that point in the show, they had definitely gone out of their way to show that these two were not getting along. They were ships passing in the night. He was still very much longing for Parker Bowles. I think that at that point they had alluded to she was sleeping with the one guy from the military, and and it was just a marriage in shambles, and by name only. And so when Queen Elizabeth says to Diana, do you want this marriage to work? And Diana is practically pleading for it to work and says she'll do anything. I'm like, since fucking when? And that's one of the issues I have with this show. Maybe it's a quibble, but I think the show is not. The show is great in many places, but I think there is where I have some difficulties with it. You know what I mean, Dave?
Yeah. It's like I said. There's 11 years worth of time to cover in this, and there are other stories too. And to get through everything with Charles and Diana in that time, it could be years between these interactions that we are seeing, and they have this overarching narrative that they are trying to push forward. So you miss out on a lot of the connective tissue between those events. You sort of have to think about when they were on their Australia trip, and they finally start thrashing it out with each other. They do admit to each other that I do love you. It's just things are complicated. Charles has his feelings divided between two women. Diana's dealing with, again, having a husband that does not appear to be in love with her, and she starts pushing, okay, well, we just need to work more on us being more open. A lot of this is basic marriage stuff, but we all kind of have to work our way through that. And it's, at that point, they sort of do in that episode, you see the two of them start to come together once they start to, push forward on working together in their relationship, even to the point where Charles hangs up on Camilla when she calls him. But then Diana gets more popular in the public eye, and Charles becomes jealous because, damn it, I've got things I want to say, and nobody cares about what you have to say. And that's sort of when he doubles down on the dismissal of Diana.
One of my favorite scenes of the entire season is when Diana, the whole sequence of events, Diana seeks to give Charles a present, and because she is a performer at heart, she decides she's going to do Uptown Girl at a live performance as a surprise for him, and his reaction is he's mortified. Yeah. I died. I was like, like her, and it's so funny because like you can see both of their points of view. She's like, I'm trying to show you I love you. She was like, you just want the spotlight. Who the fuck are you trying to fool?
Yeah, and it was when she did the next gift where she just did like a private song on tape for him, saying like, I know you don't like me in the spotlight, so here's something I've done just for you. And then it cuts to him talking on the phone with Camille. It's like, oh, it was some modern pop song. It was ghastly.
Yeah, he was being.
And it's like, dude, like I get it. It's not the thing you're into, but she was trying to be thoughtful and she was trying to show you that she loved you. Like. Accept the spirit of the gift for which it is given, but by that point he's just been committed to the whole thing. Like jumping ahead, like the funniest line of the entire show is in the last episode where he ambushes Elizabeth, and he says like, Mummy, I have done everything I possibly can to make this relationship work. I'm like, ha! By everything you mean as little as possible.
I was gonna say, and I think she had the same reaction. She was like, "What? No, you haven't, you spoiled brat." And Andrew, your thoughts on Emma Coren as Diana, your thoughts on Josh O'Connor's continued performance as the wonderful, the benevolent, the beneficent Prince Charles.
Josh, I mean, we'll start with Josh Connor just because his portrayal of Charles is so good. It is just, he inhabits that character on a very physical level. In terms of the way he carries himself, he stoops constantly, and it's kind of funny. I mean, when my wife and I were watching this, we were kind of musing back and forth on various what ifs for things. I think on some level, Charles is somebody who's trapped by his circumstances and not being able to be with Camilla. On the flip side, he's also a victim of his own behavior by continuing with it and not treating his wife well and things along that line. And here comes the big meat of the conversation. That's Emma Corrin's performance. I think in terms of her performance, the way she carried herself, the way she embodied Diana, I think, like I said, it is eerily haunting.
She's biting her lip that much in public? Jesus Christ. Every scene she's biting her lip.
Oh no, there's a lot, and if you there are 7 pages. My wife has shown me on Instagram where people have put the side by side of a lot of those scenes with Diana and Charles, and she's spot on in terms of embodying that person. And I think, Mark, I'm on the same page with you. I don't know. And they do everything they try and portray to her, and there's scenes where your skin just crawls when she's in them. Like, I think in her second or third episode where she's brought in and she needs to, has to curtsy to everyone in the right order. Like, your skin is just crawling for her because it's so awkward, and people aren't being necessarily kind to her and things like that. I mean, that's one of those things that I have more trouble getting around because
I would say it's like
perspective.
It's like a royal jumping into a gang.
Oh yeah, definitely.
I was gonna say, are you aware of what a jumping in is?
Relatively.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, this is the more polite version.
No, definitely. I mean, she was being put through the ringer on that one. But I mean, to put things in perspective as well about Diana, it's not like they kind of portray her as this simple girl. She wasn't a simple girl. She was a member of one of the major other aristocratic households in the UK. I mean, definitely not. There's everyone else in there is the royal family, but I mean, it's not like it's a world she was completely alien to. And I think that kind of brings me to my point of I was always having trouble trying to fully reconcile with the series what they were saying in terms of the text of the show versus what they were kind of showing in the show. Do you guys kind of know what I'm getting at? Because I think they kept on saying, yeah, Diana's this very sweet girl, and she's very innocent, and she's in over her head. But on the flip side, I think her portrayal and her performance and the way she conducted herself, I think says something on the flip side. And I think, Mark, you pointed it right out, where, you know, she wasn't dumb about this. She knew she was getting in the spotlight. She knew she was getting attention. And I mean, that's something where I think it could have been a little bit more clear on what it was trying to get at.
Yeah, there was that
and
one
what it was
scene
trying to say about Diana.
Yeah, there was that one scene where she meets with the Queen, like she tries and hugs the Queen thing, and the Queen says, like, you're still in the spotlight, you're getting a bit much of attention, and she's like, don't pretend that you don't enjoy it, because we all do. You know, like not in a nasty way, but she was just pointing out, like, no, like you do actually bear some responsibility here. It is cool to be in the spotlight, and you know, you like it, and we know it. So,
Yeah,
that was not really the major focus of the character arc. So yeah, a lot of that stuff is kind of buried in the one-off little details.
Yeah, I mean, it's buried in the subtext. I think once you get later in the series, the motivation becomes clearer, and I think it aligns with what I understand about Diana, is that once the boys were born, she became fiercely protective of them in terms of being in their lives, and I think part of it was that she was worried that if she divorced Charles, they would push her out of the boys' lives, and she saw it as part of her duty at that point to be, you know, the mother of the future King of England.
Yeah, I would also posit that, again, with the Charles Diana thing, I really have to reiterate, you know, I don't know the details of the real couple. Probably a lot of that no one really knows outside of the deep insiders. So all my comments here are on the characters as presented in this show, not the real people, because I have no idea. But, you know, it's sort of shown that she's not getting any love or affection from Charles. So, you know, the next best place for her to go is to the children. You know, like that's sort of her crutch. You know, her lifeline in her situation is, you know, I can at least love my children and be with them, because, you know, my husband is way more interested in his mistress.
The only insight you get into Charles's behavior towards Diana is Anne's speech and his phone calls with Parker Bowles, which I think is another lapse in the way the show is presented. I would have liked to have seen more of Charles and Diana in the early onset, because I think the way that he tells the story and the way that it's presented is that he gave it the old college try. And, you know, and Anne's monologue, I think, goes to that. You know, it's like, I think he married this girl because she was good for the crown. He had children with this woman because that's what he's supposed to do. And then once he got that far, he was like, okay, duty fulfilled. I can go about my life now. I can go be happy. And as a man, as a husband, I feel like even if you have the hots for another gal, something has to have happened in between that time. And Anne does have a line about they don't understand each other. There's the age difference. Okay, but as great as that monologue by Anne is, and I have to say the actress that portrays her, Erin Doherty, she hasn't done a lot, but I want her to do a lot more. And
she's just perfect.
Yeah.
I've seen video of the real Princess Anne and just spot on. Perfect.
Well, just as an aside, Erin Doherty, I hope she gets a lot more work. She hasn't done a tremendous amount from what I remember reading of her wiki page. But I feel like coming out of The Crown, I hope her agent's getting her shit tons of work because she's phenomenal. In any case, her, other than the stuff she alludes to in the monologue, I never got a sense of why Charles and Diana had such difficulties that led to what we do see. You know, like, they kind of George Lucas'd it. Take another drink, folks. I'm referencing Star Wars. I feel like with Charles and Diana, you get a little bit of what brought them together. Then there's this huge it's a fucking Jesus' story. Here's the birth. There's going to be a whole section where his life is missing, and then we're going to get right to when he's roaming around the desert.
Yeah, the specter of Camilla is always hovering above their relationship. As presented.
And you know what the problem with the desert is? There's sand. It gets everywhere.
I don't like it.
And that was better line delivery than Hayden Christensen. I'm sorry, I had to go there.
Thank you, Andrew. The check's in the mail, but I lie to you. Listen, you see what I'm saying, though? Like, I don't feel like there was enough of a base established as to why things got to be so shitty. They just said, here they meet. Here's them getting together. Things are shitty. Here's Anne's explanation of it. And it's like, okay, but I would have liked to have seen it.
Yeah, it's like Tyrion's monologue in the last episode of Game of Thrones, where he kind of has to retcon all of Daenerys' character development for the last half of the show.
Yeah, it's very much like that.
Yeah, I mean, credit where credit is due. Peter Dinklage almost pulls it off, but not quite.
But Dave, people like stories.
Yes.
Well, I mean, Mindy, throw it on a T-shirt. Film is a visual medium. You have to, good storytelling you show, not tell. And I don't know, for dramatic purposes, if skipping all of that and getting right to the middle chapter where everything falls apart is great storytelling, Andrew. That's just my opinion.
Yeah, I think it works sort of from the story. The problem is the story you get is very simplistic, and
it makes Charles look like shit.
Yeah, like the whole royal family kind of comes off looking the worst in this season. Like between the, as you said, the disowning of their mentally handicapped challenge. I don't know what the proper phrases are anymore, people. I'm sorry, this is the best I can do. There's disowning that, forcing Charles into this relationship with Diana, and the complete lack of support Diana gets from the family until the very last episode. You'd think that those conversations would have happened earlier on. But Charles, more than anyone else, comes off as just, unsympathetically horrible in this whole thing. Diana, as you said, she's pretty much a saint and innocent. All the quote unquote bad things she does are just as a response to how horribly she has been treated in this whole situation. Like you never really see her portrayed in a negative light. And again, I don't know the actual history of Diana, but so much of it just focuses on Charles. Like for Diana, it's like, she was asked out by the future King of England. It seemed to go well. He asked her to marry him. When the future King of England asks you to marry him, you say yes.
Yes.
And
it's right. It's right next to the rule of somebody asks if you're a god, you say yes.
Exactly.
Damn, you beat me to it, Mark.
Yeah. Like you never see Diana doing anything to deserve this herself. She's just doing what's expected of her, doing what anyone would probably do in the same situations. You can sort of imagine Diana just saying, "Look, I didn't ask for any of this. You called me."
In a way, it's almost. I called for you to jump in here, and then Dave threw you in the pool, Andrew. So.
I have more on Charles, but if Andrew wants to have his time.
Well, I want to say this, and then the floor is Andrew's. It almost feels in this modern age of ours, this progressive age of ours, where all the things for all the women all the time, it's almost anti-feminist the way that Diana is presented. She's the ultimate victim.
Yeah, no agency, I believe, is the term you're looking for.
Yes, I don't know what that means, but yes. Go ahead,
agency
Andrew.
Basically means she is actively able to control parts of the story or the events.
Right. None. Zero agency. Andrew, for the love of God, take the wheel, man.
Okay, going for it. All right, so I'm going to hit one thing really quick. I think you guys are right that they don't cover a lot of the early relationship between Charles and Diana, because actually there wasn't a lot of early relationship between Charles and Diana. They met in 1977. Charles didn't really ask her out until mid-1980, and then they got married in July 1981. So they were together for about a year before they got married, and there definitely did seem to be some level of pressure for Charles to try and pull the trigger on the marriage. I mean, he was already well into his 30s by the time he had met Diana. I mean, unfortunately, part of the job of being in the royal family is to produce heirs. So there's definitely some pressure going on there. But I mean, yeah, I think this goes back to my point where it's like we don't get a sense of what else was going on in Diana's head aside from the fact she was miserable. Was she taking her own actions? Was she doing things to try and resolve things? And it just kind of it leaves this question mark where I think there's interpretation. And I think maybe if you add those two together, you say that Diana was maybe doing both, but that's a lot of work for an audience to do.
All right, Andrew, I'm going to stay with you for just a moment. Anything else on Charles and Diana before we move on and start to wrap?
I think we've got it pretty well covered off.
David.
Yeah, so I'll just focus on Charles here. Like, Charles comes off as incredibly unsympathetic in this. Like the most sympathy I can give him is like, yeah, it sucks. You found like a girl you really, really liked, and like through political maneuverings, you weren't able to get her. You know, she got married to someone else. She's having kids with that other person. You know, like that sucks. I get it. It really sucks, and you have every right to be upset about that. But you're not the only person this has ever happened to. Like, you know, lots of us guys, the girl we marry isn't the first one we fall in love with, and everyone is the one.
Not by a long shot.
Yeah, and most of us just learn to live with it and eventually realize that, you know, there is someone else, and who you think is the one might not actually be the one after a while. Like Charles, I think, is just kind of this hopeless romantic. He just believes that he has found true love, and, you know, that's what's meant to be. He just can't accept the reality. It's kind of like, you know, quite a few people have probably had their parents murdered in front of them. Most of them don't end up dressing as a giant bat and beating up criminals for the rest of their lives. You know, like people just learn to deal with the issue and move on with life. So with Charles, like I get his grievance with his situation and how upset he is, but when that sort of turns into just the absolute horrible way he treats Diana, that's sort of when it becomes unforgivable for me. Is just, yeah, like you see her reaching out, trying to make this work. Again, the show is very focused on Diana being the good one in all of this.
The show seems to hate Charles.
Yeah, and I've heard in like an interview with the actor playing Charles, he says, you know, like he's not trying to portray Charles as a villain. He's just, you know, Charles as a person who, you know, neither of them can get everything that they need from the other in this relationship, and that's why it's falling apart. But in practice, it really does come off like he's a self-obsessed jerk. Like the bit where he's talking about fixing up their you know, estate, and it's all about the things he wants to do. And again, for those of us who are hopefully successfully married, you know that, you know, it's a group project between you and your partner to build your life together. Whereas him's just like, oh, I want this garden here, this room there. You know, no talk of any space or consideration for, you know, his wife and the house she's living in. Like, it just kind of, again, those are little things sort of used to establish that he's just completely oblivious to her and only thinking of his needs, and sort of how he will trash Diana for cheating on him, yet, you know, he thinks it's complete justice that he is cheating with Camilla, and no respect for what that does to his image or to her family. Like, it's just, he's
in his defense, isn't that the way men used to think, though? That, you know, men are meant to sow their seeds wherever there's an open field that allows it, but women should be chaste and stay at home and maintain you know, how things run. Like,
I'll give you that. I'm probably looking on it a bit with sort of modern views on the subject. And then, yes, when you are royalty, that especially like future king, it is generally viewed as a good thing that you sleep around, because it shows that, you know, the plumbing's working and it's being pointed in the right direction. You know, like an heir will be produced.
I gotta jump in with two things. So I've gotten out of the pool again.
Okay.
I think two good things on this. Two points on this one. One, I think regarding Charles, is that I think in terms of some of the, we'll put it, some of the side characteristics of him kind of come out this season, and that matchup from what I understand of the real person, which is he is literally and figuratively a kind of hippy dippy flower child. Like he is as apparently obsessed with gardens in real life as he is in this series, and he's all about the yogis and the new age and things like that. And that's definitely an element of it. And I think you guys have kind of brought up a good point that I think this series and a lot of we'll call it the other kind of modern royal stories have dealt with, and the fact that you're dealing with an institution that's over 1,000 years old, and it's been dealing with a century and 25 years at this point, where things have gone incredibly fast. I mean, 200 years ago, the occasional speech to a small crowd, stand on the balcony, wave a little bit. 100 years ago, suddenly, you had the ability, within the last 80 years, you were then doing radio addresses. Then 60 years ago, everyone was now doing TV addresses. And by the 1970s and 1980s, you have gossip media, TV, and now, of course, you have Twitter. So, I mean, you're dealing with a very small C conservative institution that's dealing with a lot of progress really quickly, and it and its members maybe aren't always the best outfitted to deal with that change.
I think that's a brilliant point.
Yeah, and sort of things come to a head with Charles's arc. Well, maybe it's not so much an arc, but yeah, when you get that final meeting this season with the Queen, and he just starts moping again, and she just says, "Suck it up! Like, stop being such a whiny, mewling baby about this whole thing. You've got a job to do. You're the future King of England, for goodness sake. Start acting like it. Man up and be a good husband." And you've just sort of been waiting for like half the season for this moment where someone just sort of puts him in his place and tells him what's really going on.
And he'll respond like a real man and divorce the woman.
Yeah, and of course that doesn't happen. But yeah.
Going back to Diana for a second, actually, and to what I was saying before, like the one thing that I talked about and thinking about some of the conversations I had with Alicia, my wife, on this was Diana was a major factor for the time she was involved in modernizing the monarchy and bringing it forward into the kind of the current world with the way that real people actually behave. And we played a little counterfactual where it's like, okay, what would happen if Diana was never in the show or was never came into the picture? Charles actually married Camilla in the first place, then maybe the royal family wouldn't be where it is right now, because they would have probably produced two very conventional sort of royals that don't really engage with people on the same level that William and Harry have.
Are you, again, not knowing a tremendous amount about these two? That's why I wish my wife were more involved in this particular podcast, because she knows all the things. But are they... I'm going to say this very colloquially. Are Diana's kids more closer to real human beings than the average royal?
Well, Harry certainly is.
Harry certainly is. I mean, and Harry's also kind of a typical... It's kind of interesting. Harry's kind of the typical second member of the family where he's got a lot more latitude. Like, for example, he did, I want to say it was 2 tours in Afghanistan with frontline units. So, I mean, he was able to do... William could never do that because he's the heir. I don't want to say too much. I've actually known people who have been in the same room with William and Kate early on in their marriage, at least, and they seem to be kind of very much more affectionate people, much more real people in a lot of ways. And I think from the way you've seen them generally interact with people in general, they're a lot more engaged. They're more willing to interact with the normal people in an open environment. So I think, I don't know if it's 100% to reality or not, but I think certainly there's the perception that William and Harry are much more accessible in a lot of ways, and that's helped the monarchy as an institution.
As we wrap here, we're going to go to final thoughts, things left unsaid, burning desires. I have one, and then the show, this last part of the show is both of yours to do what you want with, and then we'll do plugs and get out. But I want to talk about going back to the Queen, and one of my favorite scenes of this entire season. It touched me personally, and it's kind of a weird one, but it's the bit where, and we talked about this a little bit earlier, but I wanted to make sure we focused on it, where the guy who fell out of work, he was a painter, and because of the economy and the shape that it's in, he isn't getting any work, and so he's been drinking, and he's angry, and his wife has left him, and he can't see his kids, and he's collecting unemployment, and I think that eventually dries up, and he's just, and I think this is around the time of the Falklands War thing, and so his mindset is of, when did you decide as a government to stop taking care of your people who are trying to just live lives, and decide that this far-off island that, as Eddie Izzard called it, we need for strategic sheep herding purposes, was more important? And you're going to throw a parade for your efforts. Meanwhile, I can't see my fucking kids. And he crawls into the Queen's bedroom because he has nowhere else to go, and he has nowhere else to turn to, and no one else will listen to him. And he's like, I gotta talk to somebody. I deal with this on a personal level almost every day that I go to work, that people bereft of choices feeling like they need to talk to somebody in power, and so there's no one sitting at my desk, so they'll talk to me like I've got power, but I'm somebody, and so they'll talk to me. And, and of course I can't ever help them with anything they want, but that's besides the point. And he just says to the Queen, like, what the fuck? And the Queen, at least in terms of what was presented in the show, gave him the minutes to listen, and it's a very human scene with some great acting, and it's heartbreaking, and I loved it. And I wanted to just talk about it for a second, because I feel like even though it took place in the 80s, I think it's very resonant of what people are feeling now, especially in the shadow of COVID and, being out of work. And, we were all moving merrily along in our lives, and suddenly this pandemic happens, and people are out of work, and they can't pay their bills, and they're like, what and what do we do? And how am I supposed to live? And who will listen to me? Who will help me? And feeling like you're completely powerless. And, he should not have broken into the palace, and he should not have, picked a fight with the stepdad. But I still saw where he was coming from. And I think on some level he has a valid point. Like, there are arguments to be made for strategic defenses, but you probably shouldn't let people fall into the gutter either. And so personally, I really like that scene. Let's first react to that scene and then back around for your final thoughts and whatnot. Okay, Andrew?
Sounds good. And you know what? I'm just going to say, I'll talk about this one, and then I think this will probably cover off any of my final thoughts as well. But I did enjoy that episode quite a bit, and I think I know what it was getting at. I mean, I think one of the things that's a setting, kind of the background setting for what, for what they were trying to portray Thatcher is that, she's often in the background, and she's kind of doing these very lecture-y sort of speeches where she's kind of haranguing people, kind of going down to the point of the medicine and things like that. And I'm like, Jesus Christ, no wonder Alan Moore wrote V for Vendetta about her.
Perfect.
That's what it was based on, was what he thought England was like under Thatcher. And I think there's a lot of people that I think would sympathize with what Fagin was feeling and what he had done both in the 1980s and let's say about 2008. Mm-hmm. Right now are times where people are discontented. One thing I will say is there was kind of this interesting compare and contrast in the series, was that you had that episode, and then I think right after that episode, you then had Diana trying to go to the Queen to resolve things, and her getting out of there like her hair was on fire.
Mm-hmm.
So it was kind of this interesting compare and contrast on maybe what the character of the Queen dealt with and what she was more comfortable dealing with. I mean, obviously she didn't have much of a choice with the whole Fagin episode, but
she was faced with two different arguments. The argument from Diana was love me. The argument from Fagin was, hey, your subjects are falling apart here, and you're letting the Prime Minister get away with it. What the fuck? And I can see where the Queen would be like, I would rather listen to the homeless bum than have to deal with you, who needs a hug.
Fair enough.
Yeah, at least I know he's going to get thrown out of the palace.
I do recall I did have one other burning desire to talk about really quick, and I gotta just shout out the first episode when they're kind of doing the cross-cutting between all the scenes leading up to the boat, Mountbatten's boat blowing up, in terms of like craft and in terms of building suspense, in terms of the cinematography, the music. Somebody stole one of Hans Zimmer's tricks from Dunkirk for that one, but it was just this. That was just an amazing kind of building of tension to that event happening, and really just a great piece of filmmaking.
I just have one comment about that that I want to add. I was really shocked that they addressed the IRA and then we never saw them again. Correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't the IRA blow lots of shit up over a decade? Like, wasn't that a constant, thorn in the side of the monarchy?
It was, but they mainly limited it to Ireland, so it didn't really come over into Northern Ireland, rather. So it wasn't something that then came back and affected a lot of Greater Britain.
Well, I only mention it because the show mentions it. They gave a line to Thatcher about, much like very similar to Reagan's, we will not negotiate with terrorists. And then, so I'm thinking that over the course of the show, we're going to loop in Thatcher dealing with the IRA, and then nothing. I almost wonder why you gave her that line then.
That one I kind of wonder about myself, because I mean the troubles are also incredibly complex. So I mean, it's again kind of picking and choosing what you're going to do in history. I think the other element that, and this is me getting a little meta here, is that things in Ireland and Northern Ireland have been somewhat uncertain over the last 4 years.
Oh, really? I thought it was all settled and everyone was learning to get along. And at this point, we have more trouble with the Middle East than we do with the fellow white folk.
Well, there hasn't been anything violent, but I think that's why I chose the phrase uncertain. So basically, what happened was that after the Accords in the 90s, and because the EU and the UK was part of the EU and the Republic of Ireland was in the EU, any trace of a border between the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland effectively vanished. And then 2016 happened and Brexit happened. So one of the big sticking points in all of the Brexit negotiations was whether or not there was going to be a border put up and customs put up between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland again. And like not long after, I can't remember when it was, but within the last couple of years, somebody actually did pull off a very poorly staged, like car bombing outside of the Northern Irish Parliament or something like that, and there had been rumblings of.
Hang on, you said poorly planned.
IRA reform. You
said poorly planned. So on a scale of 1 being the shoe bomber and 10 being, one of the bombing of the USS Cole. About where are we on the scale?
It was on the 1 level, but given the fact on how violent the troubles got, it was worrying for everybody. And I mean, even I was worried about it at the time because you thought it had been settled. And I mean, I think I wouldn't be shocked if with Brexit within the next 20 years we potentially see a movement to actually have all of Ireland unified again. Yes. But that was, I don't know if that's maybe the reason or if they just didn't have space for it in the greater narrative.
Before I move on to David, anything else, Andrew? Your final thoughts on the season?
Now, right now, are we going to talk about season 5 cast?
Yes, right before plugs.
In a bit.
David, go ahead.
Overall, I would say, like, good season as always. The royal family have sort of come out probably looking the worst that they have out of all these seasons. Most seasons, there is some positivity in there. This one, there was sort of the least amount. So I can certainly understand there being a bit of drama about that. And like my only kind of concern is because this is a dramatization of history and it's focusing more on story than portraying the whole breadth of history. Like you say, it's kind of annoying how they have these big historic events happen and then no follow-up. Like all of a sudden the IRA is this huge thing and then it's never really mentioned again. It was the same when I think it was first or second season where they had the Suez crisis, and Andrew and I as Canadians, that was a huge moment for Canada where we sort of were the first peacekeeping country in modern history. But of course, the Crown is not about Canadian military history; it's about the Crown. So it's all the events and elements of the show are sort of structured around that. It's all about what's related to the Crown. What's the bare minimum we need to know in order to tell that story. So I sort of reiterate again, I think it would be a wise choice for them to kind of start each episode with a disclaimer stating that this is a dramatization. While inspired by actual events, things have been changed for dramatic purposes, so on and so forth, just out of the concern that people might start believing this is one-to-one factual history and judging their opinions based off of that.
All right. So just a quick look into the future here. Season 5, we have Imelda Staunton, known for playing What's-Her-Face from Harry Potter, as the Queen. We've got... Who's What's-Her-Face? What's the character's name?
You're going to have to give us a bit more than What's-Her-Face.
The one in all pink who's the evil head mistress. I can't remember.
Oh, yeah. The name kind of comes and goes.
Don't you nerds have this stuff memorized? You Harry Potter nerds?
I'm not a Harry Potter nerd.
No, Andrew is. Oh. I don't know who...
I'm not. Wait one, I'll get it.
Apparently I've got the wrong guys on this show. Yes, Imelda Staunton as What's-Her-Name from Harry Potter. She's the Queen. So I think that's pretty good casting right there. She did a phenomenal job as that character. I mean, I don't think I've hated a character in that series more than her.
Oh, she was the most evil character in the entire Harry Potter series, in my opinion.
Jane Umbridge.
That was it, Miss Umbridge.
That's the one. We have Leslie Manville as Princess Margaret. Leslie Manville has a pretty stellar career. You might know her from recent films as Maleficent, Mistress of Evil. She plays Flittle. She was in... she was actually in both Maleficent movies. In television, she was in the show Love Life as the narrator. She was in Harlots. She was Lydia Quigley. That's where I know her from. She was Lydia Quigley in Harlots. You guys watch Harlots? You should.
I do not, but I'll take it under advisement.
What about you, Andrew? Like a little Harlots in your life?
I have not watched it.
Do you have Hulu? Do you get Hulu up in Canada?
We don't have Hulu in Canada.
Oh, for fuck's sake.
It's region locked.
Well, wherever you can find Harlots, if not Hulu, because you can't because it's Canada, get a hold of it. She plays Lydia Quigley. She's fantastic. That's Leslie Manville. Princess Margaret. We've got Jonathan Pryce, who I believe is being casted as Philip, and Elizabeth Debicki, who Marvel fans might know as Aisha from Guardians of the Galaxy. She was the one all in gold.
Oh, she was? Oh, she's great. I recognize her from other stuff too, but
yes. Some of the things she's been... Yeah, she was Aisha in Guardians of the Galaxy 2. She was Emperor Haban Lamai in Valerian and the City of a Thousand Planets, which you may have seen on video because nobody saw it in the movies. She was Mina Jensen in the Cloverfield Paradox. She's Mopsy in Peter Rabbit. She was in Tenet, Andrew.
I have not seen Tenet, actually. I did not go to theaters, so I'm waiting for that to come out on Blu-ray next week. I have seen her in a lot of stuff, though, so I think she's a good fit for Diana.
And you and I talked about this in chat, and I think it's time you and me have a sissy slap fight over it. Dominic West from The Wire, fucking McNulty. What the fuck did I do, McNulty, as Prince Charles? I
have not seen The Wire. I have zero reference. I have seen him in a lot of other stuff, and he is a very good actor.
Yes. But you did not see him as Prince Charles. What's your fucking problem, you Canadian, you?
I think, I'm looking at him right now, and it's like, I guess I could see him as Charles. It's just, I see Charles as being a lot more, mousy, I think is a good way to describe him, and Dominic West doesn't look like that.
Yeah, here's where...
He's a little too handsome of a guy, I think.
Yeah.
Charles is a little gawky, and I think Dominic West is a little too good looking to play that character.
Here's where I'll agree with you, and I will give you this much. I don't know how goofy Jonathan O'Connor as Prince Charles morphs into handsome, manly Dominic West. That's a hell of a change. David, do you have...
I think that's one of the ones where it's like you're going to need to take a minute, and I think that's one of the things with this series that you definitely need to take a minute or a couple of episodes to get used to the change. Because I'd say that even happened between Matt Smith and Tobias Menzies, where the actor changed and the portrayal changed. And the funny thing is between Menzies and Matt Smith is that there's not a huge age difference there. I think there's a pretty big one between Josh O'Connor and Dominic West.
I'm sorry, I said John before. Thank you for correcting me. Dave, what do you think? Settle the score between myself and Andrew here. Dominic West is Prince Charles, yay or nay?
I'm going to say yay because acting.
Brilliant.
What's next? Gillian Anderson as Margaret Thatcher? As if that would work.
I don't think there's a better way to end this podcast, so good night, everybody. All right. That, I believe, takes it for Season 4 of The Crown. We had a lovely discussion, gentlemen. I appreciate both of you for being on. Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you, Mark, as always.
Thank you, David.
Thank you, Mark. Anytime.
All right. With that said, we had quite a busy week here on the Radulich and Broadcasting Network. We, of course, did the seminal piece of modern literature on Source Material Live, a tomb of great authority, My Little Pony Transformers from IDW, and a fun time was had by all. And speaking of fun times had by all, myself and Chris Bailey reviewed AEW Winter is Coming, where Kenny Omega, that bastard, stole the AEW title off of Moxley like a thief in the night and ran off to Impact. And 3 more people saw that than normal. That episode of Impact. Nobody watches Impact. Myself and Chris Sheehan reviewed the latest TakeOver War Games. And we had fun with that. And then myself and Jesse Starcher reviewed Clutch the Weathermaker Series Volume 1 on the Metal Hammer of Doom. That's all in the archives. Next week, we've got Chris Sheehan and Alexis Haina. Something a little bit more serious than My Little Pony Transformers, just a smidgen. We're going to talk Batman, 3 Jokers. And then the prodigal son, Ronnie Adams, the screaming boy himself, will stop playing D&D for 5 minutes and join us back on the Radulich and Broadcasting Network as he twisted my arm and made me watch a 6-season sitcom called Community. Apparently, that's what all the cool kids watch, that and Parks and Rec. So I did it. I rose to the challenge. I watched all 6 seasons of Community, and now we're going to talk about it. And then after I'm done with all that, myself and Jesse Starcher, we're going to review the latest Public Enemy album, because what else would you do on a metal podcast but review a rap album? What you going to do when the grid goes down? You better be ready. And then finally, Chris Bailey, myself and Pat Mullen will do the next chapter in the history of heavyweight boxing. We're going to look at the real deal of Evander Holyfield. Are you excited, Andrew?
I am looking forward to that one. That's going to be really, really good. So I thought I'm just going to say this as a completely biased party, but that is, for those of you who haven't and have any interest in boxing whatsoever, please go check out that series. That is an excellent piece of work you guys have done. Why,
thank you. On this special episode of the History of Boxing, I will scream about how Riddick Bowe deserves to be in hell for fracturing the title that Tyson took such great care to unify. These are the things that upset me. All right,
I'll be more or less angry than about Andrew Galata punching everyone in the nuts.
Oh, he's one of my favorites now. between old nut punch Andrew Galata and Velvet Pants Jerry Quarry, man, I've got quite the list of my favorite boxers going. All right, I've blathered on long enough. Andrew, I don't know what you're going to be on next, but what do you got going on in your world?
Alrighty then. Well, I think I might be jumping in on either Cobra Kai or Mandalorian Season 2, so those will be in January. But aside from that, provincial restrictions aside right now, generally I do try and train at Esteemed Martial Arts and Havoc JKD here in Calgary, despite the fact that gyms and sports and fitness classes are closed right now. They are offering online classes for paid members. Those are being done by Zoom, so please go check them out on the Facebook, all your social media for Esteemed Martial Arts and Havoc JKD. I know my instructor is also going to be opening up an full online learning curriculum called Havoc U in the new year. Not a lot of details about that, but I'll tell you my instructor there, Jay Cooper, is an amazing instructor. 20-year law enforcement professional, literally easily as much time of that in the martial arts himself. Great instructor, great material. If you're serious about martial arts or looking into that, please go check out Havoc U if you get the chance. Other than that, that's about it. I hope everyone has a very safe and happy holiday season. Christmas, Hanukkah, Kwanzaa, whatever you happen to have, may it be a happy and healthy one.
Thank you, Andrew. All right, David, take me home, baby doll.
Okay, well, I'll probably also be on the Mandalorian Season 2 and the Cobra Kai Season 3 podcasts. Potentially Wonder Woman 84, depending on how the heck we're supposed to get it in Canada. And other than that, a few weeks ago I recorded the second part of our Star Trek retrospective covering the Next Generation movies with Robert Winfrey. So that'll get up as soon as I get around to editing it, and since Cyberpunk just came out today, that's probably not going to be anytime soon, but we'll see.
I would thank you for all your timely podcasts, David.
Yeah, well, I didn't announce a schedule, so I don't have to stick to it.
Fair enough. Yeah, touche. All right, that is our show for this evening. Thank you for joining us on TV Party tonight. For the two Canadian fellas, I'm Mark Radulich. Be well, be safe, and behave.